We can kick off straight away at 2 o'clock, Nina, can't we?
Yeah.
We're not really, do you want us to wait for people to join?
No, I will let them in as they come in, and Mike as well. I'll admit all. Should we start now?
Yeah.
Or just to admit them? Yeah. So.
Well, hello, everyone. Let me introduce the session. We've got a lot of people that are joining us as we speak, and I'm seeing my screen fill up with lots and lots of boxes with names in, which is terrific. I think we're expecting about 100 people or so to join us on this session, which is terrific. Let me just start off by introducing myself. My name is Peter Sunby. I'm NEA's Director of Operations. Those of you who've joined the conference, I'm hoping will know something about NEA, National Energy Action, and who we are and what we do. But in terms of where I fit in and some of my colleagues fit into the organisation, I kind of lead the bit of the organisation that does the practical delivery of services. So NEA, of course, historically has been it is a campaigning organisation that campaigns to try to ensure that policies are in place, that the people who form policies are informed to produce the right policies and to hold them to account for that. But we very much see ourselves as being part of the solution to fuel poverty as well. And to that end, we, in partnership with many other organisations out there, deliver practical projects which bring support, hopefully which aim to bring support to householders that are fuel poor and vulnerable, and to organisations that work with householders. So that's myself. This session is called Reducing the Gap in Support for Advice, Increasing Accessibility and Addressing Digital Exclusion. And I guess what we're trying to do with this session and with the terrific panel of speakers that we put together is to recognise that advice to householders is such an important part of trying to find solutions to fuel poverty. That reaching net zero will require a much more comprehensive network of advice provision than is perhaps currently available. And that's already becoming evident with emerging schemes, many of which will require us to provide greater support and deeper retrofits to the least energy efficient homes. In order for that to work successfully for householders, we need to be providing them with the proper advice and support to make that work. But also, as has been explored, and as we're all very, very much aware, we're heading for something of a winter crisis. And in that respect, providing immediate responses in terms of responding to the demands for advice and for support that we know are becoming our way is something that's exercising all of us. And I'm hoping that when we talk to or hear from our speakers shortly, we'll hear about different organisations are planning and preparing and what the issues might be around that. The other thing, of course, is to bear in mind that so many of us that provide advice and support have had to start providing that support online and digitally. And we know that there are so many householders who are effectively digitally excluded, not only from kind of getting the services that are provided by energy companies and others through that digital exclusion, but from the support that we have had to offer in that manner through as a response to the pandemic. And whilst we hope to be able to move out of the pandemic and to start offering in a less digital way, it's clearly going to be a huge part of all of our operations going forward. As far as NEA is concerned, a very, very brief overview of what we've been providing. We've kind of called our services under one of those snappy acronyms, Warm and Safe Homes Service. It's our WASH service, which essentially is our advice service. It's basically a service that we offer direct to householders at the moment, offered primarily digitally online as a telephone advice service. And it does provide direct energy advice to householders, many of whom are in the most difficult of circumstances. It's a service that's limited and constrained in the sense that we can only offer it within the context of the funding that we've got to offer the service, but we appreciate that it's part of a network of services that needs to be coordinated together if it's to be able to begin to meet the demands that are out there and which are needed. Part of that, of course, is that we are absolutely committed as an organisation to improving the accessibility of our services. And one of my colleagues, Nikki, will talk in just a little while about what that means to us and how we've sought to try and respond to that. So that's a bit of introduction from me. A couple of housekeeping-y type things. We've got a lot of speakers to hear from. We've got an excellent panel, and I'm going to ask our speakers to address us in just a minute. I'm hoping that there will be time for Q&A at the end. We're up against time in the sense that we need to be concluding the session by about 3:15 in order to permit us to go into the next session. So there isn't much opportunity to extend it, unfortunately, which I would normally do if there were a lot of questions. Where you have questions, do please put them in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. And as I've said to the panel before, I'll make sure that the most difficult and most challenging questions are selected from them so that they'll be suitably challenged to give some answers for us. Hopefully not. I'm sure that there'll be very straightforward questions from most of you. Okay, with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, and that's Ian Preston. Ian's Head of Household Energy Services at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, an organisation I'm sure many of us know very well. And Ian, if I could ask you to present to us.
Thanks very much. I'm going to start off with the challenge of sharing my screen. And now trying to start this slideshow. So hopefully, can you see my slides? Is that working?
Yes, Ian, we can.
Good. Thank you for the introduction. We're an independent charity. We were formed in 1979, and we've been giving local energy advice since 1991 through an energy efficiency advice centre. So as highlighted, there is a huge demand for advice services more broadly, but energy advice and fuel poverty advice. That's a large queue, and we already have one for our services, and we've not even gone into winter. So last financial year, which obviously covered last winter and the sort of pandemic, we gave advice to 43% more households than normal. So we spoke to nearly 15,000 households, predominantly in the sort of southwest area. But we managed to access additional funding. The Energy Redress Fund made available money for prepayment meter vouchers, and I know NEA and lots of other organisations accessed that and were able to support households. We obviously moved to predominantly a phone-based service because we weren't able to go into people's homes, but we have done bits and bobs around that with doorstep visits, video calls, meetings in parks. But we are now thinking about a return to in-home advice through home visits, because obviously there are some people who, they can't do video calls on smartphone unless you can get a carer or a family member there. And then during the pandemic, with people shielding, that was particularly challenging. So in terms of accessibility, unfortunately in England, it remains a bit of a postcode lottery. I know NEA's WASH service is broader, but the level of demand is huge, and we feel that you need a local hub, a local centre, ideally in every local authority or every county or in each area. So NG6 is the nice guidance on cold homes, which recommended a single point of contact for services, and that was some time ago now, probably 6-7 years. I don't have the date in my head. And what we see locally is some local authorities, public health teams, CCGs are funding fuel poverty advice services, and then others aren't. And then sometimes whether those projects happen is also dependent on the presence of a third sector organisation like ourselves, or Citizens Advice Office, which is particularly sort of got an interest in this area. There's kind of no uniform service in terms of you can guarantee that in each area there's a local point of contact. And we always feel that face-to-face advice is always going to be needed for some households. Yes, we can do lots more online, and we've done lots over the phone, as you can see from the stats. But yeah, we need to think about broader provision. So very, very quickly, in terms of accessibility, I'll talk about one project we do, Warmer Homes Advice and Money, which is a partnership of a number of organisations, basically. So It's been funded by a variety of sources. We've got a small amount of local authority funding, but predominantly it came from Bristol City Council's Community Impact Fund, so nothing to do with health or our housing team. The Warm Homes Fund and Energy Redress are the larger funders. And we've worked in partnership with all the organisations there. So Talking Money are a debt agency, We Care, I used to be We Care Home Improvement, so they're a sort of home improvement agency. Then we've got the local citizens advice bureaus, and then also we've got an AMS Electrical who do minor works. We've got a hospital caseworker, so we've got somebody who's back in the hospital now. Obviously that was challenging during the pandemic, and they actually went and started working in a food bank rather than being placed in a hospital. So that was good in terms of our links with the local food bank, which is, although we were already working with them, the fact that we had a caseworker in the food bank for 12 months has obviously meant we've got a much better, closer working relationship. So the caseworkers can directly refer to all of those organisations. And when we used to go into the office back in that day, they also used to have, rotate their time. They didn't have a desk in our office. They used to go to each office of each organisation, and we learned a lot more about each other in doing so. And so there's the team, the WAM team. And it does all the good stuff that we know that probably you do in terms of energy advice, making sure people have got the benefits they're entitled to, income maximisation, all of that sort of stuff. There's very happy clients, which I won't dwell on because I know I'm nearly at 5 minutes. But we've also been delivering more in terms of the local authority delivery scheme, the LADS scheme, and ECO recently, in terms of we've been doing retrofit assessments as part of that work. So we've been doing the surveys, we've been gathering the evidence, and then we've been passing that lead on to an installer. So in terms of accessibility for our clients, vulnerable clients who've in the past struggled with the ECO process, where a surveyor goes around, starts taking pictures in their home, which is very invasive. We've been doing that, and that obviously the client trusts us because they already know us. So that's taken a whole visit out of the eco sort of process for energy efficiency measures, which has been really good. So finally, my recommendations, well, a national network of energy advice centres might be good. And thinking to the past, maybe 52 seemed like a good number. Some of you with long memories will know what I'm getting at. But yeah, there used to be a national network of local advice centres. I also think there's a massive role for ourselves in delivering retrofit assessments as part of the eco process, schemes process. So taking it away from the installer, giving it into the hands of an independent charity or organisation who's got the client at heart. And yeah, we need more funding for public health and CCGs and all the rest of it, all that good stuff. So that is 6 minutes, and I will end there because I know otherwise we will.
That's great, Ian. Thanks so much. And yes, you're absolutely right. There are some people on this seminar with longer memories who might remember when there was another acronym in the field, which was the EAC. And there was in fact a network of energy efficiency advice centres back in those days, which are no longer part of the scene. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to highlight that absence, Ian. I'm now going to hand over to Matthew Scott, who's a Research and Policy Officer at NEA. And Matthew, you're going to talk a little bit about a session we ran on Warm Homes Week about digital exclusion last year and some of the lessons that we've learned from that. So Matthew, if I can hand over to you.
Thanks, Peter, and hello, everyone. As Peter says, my name is Matthew Scott. I work in the policy and advocacy team here at NEA. And I think in this brief 5 or 6 minutes, I'm going to touch on two things. Firstly is just a bit of an update on some of the work that we've been doing over the past year. And secondly, a couple of key learnings from that work that I think are useful and relevant to bring to this session. So firstly, a little background. Some of the audience might remember that this time last year at Warm Homes Week, we ran a workshop in collaboration with colleagues at Citizens Advice and also with Energy Systems Catapult, looking at some of the issues and challenges that digitally excluded households face in engaging with the energy market. That workshop was really important in kickstarting some of the work that we've done in this area since. Particularly, I'm thinking of our recent work with Smart Energy GB, on accelerating the smart meter rollout for vulnerable households. And it also stimulated a follow-up event on digital inclusion in the future energy system, which we held in collaboration with colleagues from Liverpool University and also with Good Things Foundation, and which featured speakers from across Good Things Foundation's fabulous network of online centres, as well as others doing good work in this space. And in the background, we've also been speaking to members, speaking to households as part of the research and evaluation work that we do about their experiences of digital inclusion and exclusion, and feeding this back to government and the wider industry when we've had the opportunity to do so. So reflecting back on that work, and in the spirit of offering a couple of thoughts for potential discussion a bit later on in this session, I want to touch on two of the most important things that I think we've been getting at through this work. The first is what we could call just the sheer multiplicity of digital exclusion and digital inequalities, and how it intersects with other vulnerabilities in the energy market. It's tempting to think of digital exclusion sometimes as a binary thing, as a sort of yes, no, somebody's digitally excluded or they're not. But there are kind of several different kinds that we sort of know of and that we're sort of exploring in our research. So to give a very sort of brief list, and there's more than this, we know of non-users, those who have no access to the internet at all, whether that's because they don't have an internet connection, because they can't afford one, or because they've got no interest in using the internet. We've also got what could be termed narrow users, so those who have an internet connection or who have access to a smartphone or other digital devices, but for whatever reason don't have the skills and the confidence to use them to their full, to their sort of optimum ability. And then we've also got other kinds of inequalities at play. And by spatial inequalities on this slide, I don't just mean sort of geographical inequalities, sort of broadband issues for rural areas. I also mean things like those who are relying on libraries and other public spaces and cafes to use the internet because they don't have an internet connection at home, and require one to be able to access vital services and essential services that they need. And by temporal inequalities, I mean access that sort of ebbs and flows over the course of the week or over the course of the month, depending on things like UC payment dates or when data renews in a phone contract, which leads to some people having access to the internet or access to digital technology at certain times of the month, but not others. And I think one of the things that our research is starting to get at is just how, in addition to all of those complexities and inequalities, there's another layer of complexity that intersects when we start thinking about other vulnerabilities. And I've listed some there. The one I would touch on and dwell on is particularly the bottom one of refugees and others with no recourse to public funds, who we know face a multitude of barriers and problems in accessing the energy market as it is, but also face issues with smartphone access, internet access, and setting themselves up, particularly when they arrive in the country. And we've heard some stark stories about that just ends up in a self-disconnection more often than not because it's just too complicated to address. And I think that the question for this session is maybe how can we start getting at inclusive advice offerings that can respond to some of these unique challenges. And the second thing I want to touch on is moving from digital exclusion to inclusion, and how we can sort of use energy advice to build digital inclusion and skills amongst different households. The example that I always use here is of an elderly gentleman I spoke to as part of an evaluation that we're doing, who moved into a new rented home with a smart meter. As often happens, that smart meter went straight into the cupboard because didn't know what it was, wasn't interested in using it, didn't understand what it was for. A little bit later on, he came into contact with a single point of contact service run by a local authority who supported him with switching supplier. And he happened to mention that he had a smart meter in the cupboard, and the energy advisor therefore took the time to talk to him about what it was for, and helped him install an app on his phone so he could sort of monitor his usage and sort of help to get a bit of a grip on his energy bills. Fast forward 2 months, when I spoke to him, he was talking about sitting in his easy chair, moving money on online banking, sort of paying bills in online banking, and I've included a quote there from our interview. And he was also talking about, and I quote, hustling his car insurance provider to give him a better deal. I think it was a couple of £100 off his car insurance renewal. And what was really interesting about that, and it's the point I want to make, is that kind of swagger that he had, he sort of traced that back to the energy advice that he got. and said that it opened a window for me and it enabled me to have these skills and that confidence to go off and have benefits and get benefits for myself in other sort of essential services and markets. And that's the second point that I really want to dwell on, is that, you know, can energy advice, when it sort of incorporates digital inclusion and digital skills, how act as a window into benefits across other essential services like insurance, banking and healthcare. And as that first sentence of that quote was his way of articulating, how can we allow people to look at stuff? How can we allow people to have the skills and the confidence to go off into other areas of their lives and to reap the financial benefits that we know comes from that? I think I've just gone over 6 minutes, so I'm going to stop there and hand it back to Peter. But I'm really looking forward to a bit of chat about these themes in the discussion that follows, hopefully.
Thanks, Matthew. I hope we're not making people too obsessed with time, because, you know, you do feel that you can get your points across. But Matthew, that was excellent. And I think that the example you gave us, the case, it really does kind of bring to life, doesn't it, the difference that can be made to people's lives directly through advice. That was excellent. And also just to say that in the chat, obviously I've invited people to ask questions for a Q&A session, but this is meant to be also a kind of information sharing session. And if anybody's got anything to add to Matthew's question about how we start getting inclusive advice offerings out there, how do we address these challenges, then do please put comments in the chat. Because they'll be really, really helpful and useful to look at. Okay, with that, I'd like to move on to Nikki Swetnam, who is another one of my colleagues, a project development manager at NEA. And I mentioned at the start that obviously we've sought with NEA to address some of the challenges ourselves, recognizing that these are challenges for ourselves. So Nikki, if I could just hand over to you to talk a little bit about how we've sought to address some of these challenges. Oh, Nikki, you're on mute.
There's always one, sorry, it's bouncing. So as I was saying, as ever, the need for good quality, accurate and accessible energy advice is vital to help consumers navigate the energy market and give themselves the best chance of achieving affordable warmth. And I think it probably goes without saying with an audience such as this that some people find it easier to access advice than others. And it's important to ensure that advice providers do all we can to make sure that our services are accessible to everyone. So the reason for my little slot today is to talk a little bit about what NEA is doing around that. Some years ago, NEA made a commitment to actively work on increasing the accessibility of our services. And we actually established an internal inclusivity group to lead on this work. There is always going to be more that we can do, but I'm pleased to say we've made some good progress in the few years since the group was established. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the kind of things that we've done to try to make our services and our advice and our organisation more accessible to more people, really. So firstly, these are in no particular order, but we purchased an item called an evacu chair for our head office, which is on the 6th floor building of the 6th floor of a building in Newcastle. And this is a device that enables those with limited mobility to be safely evacuated in the event of an emergency. Staff are also trained in its safe usage. And obviously we're hoping that we'll never need to use this for real, but the fact that we have the device there makes it safer for everyone to be in the building. We also bought a portable hearing induction loop. We deliberately bought a portable one rather than having one fixed into the building so that our staff can carry it around the country for training sessions and meetings around the country that are attended by hearing aid users to help them to access the meetings and the trainings more easily. We also produced key advice documents in easy read format and also in multiple languages. And we produce guidance to staff on the use of accessible formats and colour schemes when producing documents and presentations. On several occasions, we've offered training to deaf learners via BSL interpreters, and we've supported deaf energy champions working to increase energy awareness amongst the deaf community. We've offered dementia friends training for all of our staff. We've also provided guidance for staff on gender inclusivity. And amongst our team, we've circulated materials relating to specific events, such as, for example, to name just a few, International Women's Day, Stress Awareness Month, Bipolar Awareness Day, Pride Month and Mental Health Awareness Day. That's just a few of the ones we've sent information about. We've had a focus around mental health awareness, and much of that work has been led by my colleagues Alice and Mike. Some of you who were at a conference, a face-to-face conference recently, will remember that we signed as an organisation the Time to Change Employer Pledge, and that was committing NEA to giving mental health the same importance as physical health at work, and encouraging staff to be open about mental health and to prioritise their own mental health. That, of course, became particularly important during the lockdown months. We also have always wanted to showcase good inclusive practice by other organisations so that we and others can learn and improve. And so to that end, we ran for several years in a row the NEA Celebrating Inclusivity Awards. We actually have, as part of this session, a previous winner in Vicky and Annie from Speak Up, who won the award for the projects that they were involved in making energy issues more accessible for people with learning disabilities. I won't talk any more about that though, because I don't want to steal Vicky's thunder. So in summary, I think it's important to consider that many of those who need advice services will struggle to access services which are delivered in a mainstream way. And so we all need to remain constantly aware of unmet needs and try to do our best to respond to them by adjusting the ways in which we deliver services. It's often true that by making something accessible to a specific group of people actually makes it more accessible to everyone. And as the energy market becomes ever more challenging to navigate, let's keep learning from each other and keep exploring ways of making sure that our advice and our services are easily accessible by anyone and everyone who needs them. That's all I wanted to say really, so thank you for listening.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Nikki. And I think the point that you're making about the steps that we all make to make services inclusive for particular groups of people means that we're making things available to everybody. So it really is kind of central to what we do in order to challenge ourselves to meet that that challenge. Okay, so thanks very much, Nikki. If I can move on now to introduce Sohaib Malik. So Sohaib is Policy Communications Officer at Fair by Design. And Sohaib, if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the work that your organization's been doing around inclusive design work with regulators and with the industry. I'll hand over to you to tell us more about that.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Sorry, can colleagues see the title slide?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So just briefly to introduce Fair by Design, our vision is for a UK where poor and low-income people pay a fair price for essential services. And so our mission is to eliminate the poverty premium. We work across three main markets: energy, credit and insurance. By the very nature, these are essential services needed by everybody. But the way these markets have been designed is driven by competition, which I'll touch on later, and for super consumers, which I'll return to shortly, leads to many people in vulnerable circumstances being treated less fairly. And it can also mean that products and services don't meet people's needs, and even that they are excluded from markets altogether. And that's where our principle of inclusive design comes in. And I'll be covering our work with regulators and firms on inclusive design, but also how these principles can be applied or practiced by any organization working with consumers. So, as I mentioned, we exist to eliminate the poverty premium. The University of Bristol's seminal work found that the average poverty premium, the average extra costs paid by a low-income household was about just under £500 a year. And at that time, energy was the biggest contributor. Subsequent research commissioned by Fair by Design of a much smaller sample found actually that the energy was no longer the biggest contributor. So for instance, the average premium for being on a standard variable tariff had reduced from £233 to £113. And being on a prepayment tariff had reduced similarly, or by a similar amount. So we can see the positive impact of regulation there, such as setting price caps. And of course, though, there is still work to be done, as evidenced by the current crisis. If I recall from an NEA session on Monday, fuel poverty is at about 22%. So price caps such as, protections such as price caps have to be maintained in the immediate term, and the warm home discount retained when people move suppliers. So what can be done to tackle the poverty premium? So we feel that the poverty premium exists because of a couple of main factors. The first being a disconnect between policymakers and regulators, and people's lived experiences of poverty and exclusion. These groups tend to sort of rely maybe on consumer research, maybe primarily quantitative data to inform the decisions. So for instance, the number of people switched rather than people's actual life experiences. And so going on from this, firms also compete for the most engaged customers. And so as far as regulators are concerned, with their competition lens, everything is working fine. So really we need to move upstream to prevent harm occurring in the first place. And inclusive design has been increasingly recognized as a way to ensure that markets and products and services are fair, especially for vulnerable consumers. And this includes being referenced by Ofgem in its vulnerability strategy and other regulators like the FCA and the CMA. But what is it? As Nikki just touched on, actually, it's the practice of designing products and services to ensure that they are accessible to and usable by as many people as possible. And so you start with, so instead of designing for a sort of mythical average user, you start with people with additional or out of the ordinary needs. And doing so doesn't only help those customers, but will lead to solutions that work better for all. So how do you actually put that into practice? So Fair by Design, in partnership with Money Advice Trust, published 2 guides on inclusive design, one for firms and regulators. And I can share a link in the chat afterwards. But it's because if markets aren't regulated to serve everybody with policies and guidance to achieve that, then it stands to reason that services and products are also not designed to serve everybody. But how do you do this? How do you design for as many people as possible? So in our guide, we have a practical toolkit developed in partnership with the Design Council. And this is a comprehensive walkthrough on how to embed inclusive design. And this is including practical activities that you can complete with consumers. And as I mentioned at the start, however, this approach, this methodology can be applied or adopted by anyone who is on the front line. So colleagues on this call who are practitioners. So in our guide, we talk about the benefits for regulators and firms, but why we're here is this session is titled or is about increasing accessibility and addressing digital exclusion. And so this is in the context of the expected or ongoing increased demand for advice services, sort of because of maybe unexpected issues, but also maybe in terms of the transition to net zero. And so that will bring with it a range of needs. And we need to make sure that no one is left behind. And colleagues on the front line are key to this role. So an inclusive design approach and bringing in the consumer voice could help with recognizing and responding to customers' needs. And that includes people with, say, certain protected characteristics, as Matthew had maybe touched on. So people from racially minoritized communities, sex, or in the case of single parents, older, but also younger consumers. And so, for instance, if someone is not online, it may not be because of a lack of knowledge. As Matthew touched on, there are sort of degrees of digital exclusion. And so, therefore, maybe upskilling them to use a computer may not be the appropriate solution. So instead, inclusive design would approach this from the perspective of what is the problem for the consumer. And then going on from that, what do the best solutions look like to them? And so that would help lead to services designed around real people's lives rather than perhaps assumed consumer lives. And by doing so, we would hope to increase the efficacy of service. And so just finally, inclusive design is not meant to be a checklist of activities. We would like to, or our aspiration is to transform organizations' approaches. Our guidance as such is really just the first step. We need buy-in from leadership to give their staff permission and time to build their skills in inclusive design. So we need colleagues to practice, really. Make a start by using the guide and the methods and carrying out maybe pilot projects. But also collaborate, so please share the learning internally and externally so you can inspire change from others. And of course, always start with the consumer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sohaib. So, and thanks very much for sharing what looks to be a very practical toolkit, which is, how is it accessible? Just
I can share a link in the chat to our website, and we've got the guide for the firms and regulators, but the toolkit is the same in both. Perfect.
All right, that's terrific. It looks like an excellent piece of work. Thanks for sharing that with us. Okay, if we can move on again to our next speakers. So I'd like now to introduce Vicky Farnsworth, who is an expert with an organisation called Lived Experience, and she'll be presenting with Annie Ferguson, who's a Principal Exclusion Officer at Speak Up. And they've been focusing on making things more accessible for people with learning disabilities. So if I could invite you both to talk a little bit about your work and the difference that your programs have made.
Vicky, do you want me to kick off and then we can play the video?
Yeah.
Okay. So hello, I'm Annie Ferguson, and I've worked with Vicky Farnsworth for many years. She's an expert by experience with learning disabilities. We've been very heavily involved in energy for a long time. When we first of all, because of the clientele that we work with, people are on very low incomes. So we thought of a project called I'm an Expert Energy Saver. And we did some work on a video. We're very good at making accessible information, particularly through film. And we did some work on a video which we shared very widely across the people that we work with. Then we became involved with some research called Being Warm, Being Happy, which we've got a video about, which we could show now, and then Vicky can talk a bit about it.
Being warm, being happy. Understanding what helps people with learning disabilities keep warm at home. Who did the research? Alison Owen, Vicky Farnsworth, Bethany Taylor, and Jodie Bradley, with Angela Todd leading the project. What have we been doing?
We've been finding out if people with learning disabilities have been keeping warm at home.
What have we done so far?
We have taught the temperature in 10 people with a learning disability in their home.
Who took part?
We have talked to people over 18 who live on their own or live with their families.
What happened?
One person from Sheffield University and one person from Speak Up met people in their own home.
We have left a temperature monitor for 2 weeks in their bedroom or in their living room, and they were told not to touch it.
When we removed the monitors, we talked to them about their experience.
What did we talk about?
We talked to the people about what makes them feel warm in the home and what makes them feel cold in the home.
What is happening to the information people gave us?
We recorded what you said with a voice recorder, and then we wrote it down.
We kept all the information in the safe place and confidential.
We're starting to write up a easy read report what we have found out.
So Vicky, do you want to talk a bit about that and then go on to say some of the things we've done since with Prioritise Me and smart meters?
We'll be
being warm, being happy was a big research around people with learning disabilities, and it was to really just find out how they keep warm in their homes, if it was a flat or what sort of property they owned. A few of the research what we found out was, but like the 10 homes we went round, there were very worries really around people's homes, because the temperatures monitors what they had in the living room and the bedroom, it showed, but some people was very low on the heating, so they wasn't keeping their home very warm as what you would have thought they would have been. And some people was keeping up and down with the temperature, where it would be on days where it'd be warm, there'd be probably some days where they might have been cold and they might not been putting the heating on as much as often as what you would have thought they would have been. So that was a part of the research what we found out from them. We also found out about like some people who owned their own smart meters found them useful. I have one myself, where it helps you to monitor how much gas and electric you've got on your smart meters. But there is some people who we wait for to speak up find it difficult to read the smart meters because the writing on there is small. It's not very big, so it's not very good for people who's not got very good eyesight. But so some people that speak up, it a lot more easier to have someone to support them and to understand what, you know, how to use the smart meters. And like myself, I don't do it by direct debit. I pay as you go. I have a gas card and an electric card where I go to the shop and I pay for it that way. And it'll also change colour. It'll make a noise and it'll let me know when my bills, I need to go out there and pay for it at my local shops. And the other thing we found out is people were struggling with bills, and it found them confusing and found them not easy to read, so they needed a lot of support to do that. But if Annie can back me up.
No, that's fine, darling. You're doing all right. You need to wind up though in a minute.
Yeah, that's fine. So, but since then, since after being warm, being happy, we've continued with on those other projects. What we carry on working on to do with smart meters, but it's very important for the, not just for now, but for the future, for anyone to own a smart meter in their home. And we've created an easy read booklet. What we've trying to get it out there is to many people as possible. And we've also got one of our colleagues is going to many homes and advocacy groups to get them out there and go around and ask people if they've got one or not. Yeah, is that right, Annie?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Vicky. Yeah, that's our project at the minute. We're actually doing that with the NEA and Smart Meter GB, trying to find people who are offline because they're particularly vulnerable and really getting the benefits out there. We developed some Easy Read ourselves, and then we've used some Easy Read that Smart Energy GB have produced. And last week we did get all that information out to over 500 people. So we're hoping that is going to make a real difference for the winter, given the current crisis. And then I'll just finish up by saying the other thing that we did was we found out through Being Warm, Being Happy that lots of people didn't know about priority services registers. And so we got a grant from the redress team, and we did a huge piece of work on trying to tell as many people as possible about priority services registers. And we still do that. We'll link all that together. On our website over the next week, we're going to try and put all this work together so that people have got all the energy projects together, because we know that there's going to be this massive crisis in winter. And we are able to get it out to about 200 organisations. So hopefully that will you know, there's many thousands of vulnerable people linked to those. So hopefully that will filter down.
Thanks very much to Vicky and to Annie. That was terrific. And I mean, yes, absolutely, you're right. I need to recognise, as so many of our speakers, that we're heading for a very, very difficult winter, and the kind of steps that you're taking there are going to be invaluable to many people in circumstances in order to get that information out there in a way that's accessible. So I'm sure that there'll be others that can share similar stories, but that's excellent. Thanks very much, Vicky, and apologies if I misintroduced you. I understand you're both from the Speak Up organisation, and but thanks very much for that. That was terrific. So if I could, that's terrific. If I could move on now to Kim Webster, and Kim is the regional coordinator for the Royal Association for Deaf People. Kim's going to tell us a little bit about the work of the Royal Association for Deaf People, but also some of the key issues that are relevant for supporting deaf or hard of hearing people with assistance around energy issues. So Kim, if I can hand over to you.
Hello, thank you. I just want to check with the interpreter whether she can see me okay. Yep, that's fine, thank you. Okay, great. So really I'd like to talk to you today about what we've been doing over the last year, what we've done so far, and also what we aim to do in the foreseeable future, some of the barriers that we've faced, and also what's worked really well. So we started the project back in March last year. Obviously COVID hit and we had to work very hard to switch to online services, and really it was a bit of a shock to us, I have to say. And our team, there's just 4 of us in the team, we're all deaf sign language users. We had to quickly work out what we're going to do to make sure that the people that we work with were left reassured that they had appropriate information and that the information was getting out there. So we had to consider what to do. We made some BSL videos, we added those to YouTube. So that was the first thing that we did. And then we started some one-to-one remote work, having video conversations, trying to explain to people on Skype, on Zoom, on different platforms, FaceTime, whatever we could use to have conversations with people, we would use it. And so we made contact with a number of people out in the deaf community. That worked really well. So slowly but surely word of mouth got about, and it became very popular. More people started to come to us for advice and for guidance about energy. Some people were having various difficulties linked to the pandemic and so on. And so we were kind of in the middle, and often they would want us to make phone calls with an interpreter. So the interpreter could then translate some of the information. Perhaps what we would do as well is look at the level of English language used, and we would try to make sure that that was accessible for deaf people. And so for deaf people whose first language is sign language, sometimes the reading of English can be quite difficult for them. And so we had to try and break it down and make sure that things were done in a visual way so that people understood the information. So we started doing that, and we created a workshop as well on Zoom. So far, I think we've now done, let me think how many it was. I think we've done 20 workshops. So they've been on Zoom for people to do at home, and they've worked really well. They're all very different topics that we've done. And so we've focused on benefits. We've had a look at how to read bills. We've looked at how to work out kilowatt hours. And so we've broken down the jargon for people so that they understand the information that's sent to them. And what we've also done is we've gone for some more detailed and in-depth support with some people on some particular topics that were required. So for example, for smart meters, sometimes people would book online and it would go smoothly, and the people would go to their house, but then there was no communication when the engineers got there. And so because they didn't really know how to communicate, they weren't using things like sign video or sign live video relay services. They were finding it very difficult to communicate in the home. And because of COVID, obviously, there's an additional barrier there. And so writing things down isn't always appropriate either. So really, it's trying to work with the energy companies to think about accessibility, think about how to make information more accessible, text people. So you could have two people in the room, maybe you could be using a video relay service. And so it's educating the companies about the accessibility solutions that are available out there. And the other thing is facing the barriers of third-party permissions when calling energy companies through an interpreter. So sometimes there'll be myself, there'll be a client with an interpreter. So we'll be on Zoom, and the interpreter obviously can see the client in front of them, and they can talk for themselves. I'll support them. They'll have all the information. They'll try to relay it to the energy company, and there's an immediate barrier put in the way saying that we won't talk to you because it's through a third party. And so we kind of like, well, it's not a third party because they're right here. It's just that they have to use an interpreter, and sometimes they're asked, oh, can they use their own voice on the phone? And we're like, this is not appropriate. And so how do you know if that's their voice anyway? So the same as anybody else would call up, they should have that same access and go through security and go through the normal protocol, but via an interpreter. So there are a number of barriers in the way. That's something that we continually have to deal with. And so now we are back doing some face-to-face work. We're also doing home visits again. And so we've started recently, I think last month, to think about how, so we're setting up some face-to-face workshops, doing home visits face-to-face, and we've noticed that there's a big difference in how people are working. So with home visits, we're going in and we're having to educate people face-to-face about their energy use, about how their meter works, how their heating works perhaps, and empower them to do things for themselves. So it's about giving them information really. So rather than all being remote and pointing and trying to figure out what's where, which was a real challenge, face to face we can get the information much more easily, and then it means that the people are much more confident themselves to be able to do this because we can show them what they need to do. And so with the workshops, we've had a number of people that haven't had access to Zoom for various reasons, and so people, it might be that their first language might be British Sign Language, but also they might have Polish Sign Language or French Sign Language. And so it's trying to reach out to different members of the community in the different languages and think about the different barriers that are in the way. We very successfully did a workshop. I think they were all together, it was for 3 hours. So many questions that were asked of us in relation to just recently, just about this energy crisis. People were getting confused between the gas crisis and about the CO2 issue that was in the news. And so it's trying to distinguish and explain to people the difference and what it meant. So once we'd explained, they're like, oh, okay, we didn't know, we didn't understand that information. So again, it's trying to pick out where these barriers are. So now we have noticed that what we need to provide is a hybrid service of a combination face-to-face and remote provision. And so we're doing this joined up work, doing outreach. So we're doing workshops. Obviously, if some people don't have access to the internet or so on, then they can do that. Other people are quite happy with online. And so what we've noticed is that we have with a wellbeing service, we've got a service for older people, we've got an information and guidance service, and we're doing cross referrals. That worked really successfully. So for example, we have got an over 55s coffee morning that we do every Wednesday morning. And today I was talking to them about fuel poverty and about benefits that are available out there, what situation may arise come the winter. And I was explaining to them, and they were asking me questions. And so they said, oh, could we possibly make an appointment to talk one-to-one later about whatever it was they wanted to talk about? And so this cross-referral within the organisation is definitely something that we're learning that we need to do more of. It's more partnership with the energy companies, definitely that kind of engagement and that sort of working, I think, can make a lot of improvements. Okay.
Thanks very much. That's brilliant, Kim. And thanks so much for that. I think you're very, very right to kind of point to the fact that that so many householders have been additionally excluded during the pandemic because of the fact that so many organisations like ourselves and like others that are represented on the panel have had to move to digital and telephone online types of service, which whilst we try to make is as inclusive as possible, does not work for everybody. And so you highlight the hybrid approach that you're taking at the Royal Association, and which I think many of us are hoping we can move back to in terms of the sort of more engaged community type of advice work, which we know works so well, but which of course we have to sort of step very carefully back into doing this winter at a time when I think the advice that we're all providing is going to be so much more needed. And just before I move on to our last speaker, I noticed at one point, Annie, you had your hand up. Did you have a point or something to raise?
No, I was using reactions and clapping.
Yes. Okay. That's sorry. That's me being a dimwit who doesn't understand what reactions actually mean. It could have been a happy face or something, couldn't it? I would have got that one. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, the last speaker for our session, and I think we will have a bit of a time for debate, discussion, and Q&A at the end, is Natasha Early. So if I can ask Natasha to speak. Natasha is Partnerships and Fundraising Manager at the Good Things Foundation. So Natasha, if I can ask you to bring our panel to a conclusion with your presentation, and then we'll move on to some questions.
Thank you. Yes, I am from Good Things Foundation. I guess what I've got to share with you now is a little bit about the context. So the things that were being shared about digital exclusion and inclusion. What I'd like to share with you in the next few minutes is a little bit of the context around that. So Good Things Foundation are a charitable organisation, and since 2010, yes, we've helped around 3 million people to gain essential digital skills, and the work is not done. By 2025 we want to help another 3 million, so the scale of what we do is pretty immense, and it also signifies just how many people do not have those essential digital skills. We work with thousands of community partners around the UK and overseas, and it really resonated with me earlier around what Ian was saying about needing that community hub, needing to have somewhere in your community that you could get access to the kind of support that you trust, that relates to you and your needs as a human being, rather than just sort of like a straight up digital skills support from a faceless organisation. So those community partners are absolutely essential in the delivery of the work that we do. And we're funded by a variety of organisations who also have their own agendas. So that might be government in the form of education, it might be the NHS in the form of health, it could be corporate organisations who are vested in having people get online for employability or financial health reasons. So we work with a number of partners, one to define and create programs of skills support, but then we also do that through communities, so that we try to ensure that it meets the needs of those that are seeking help. I'm going to share my screen so I can share with you some stats that just give you an idea of the scale, and also the impact and some of the benefits of being online. So if you just bear with me a moment whilst I share. I think one of the things that resonated with me that Matthew was sharing was that there are a number of different layers to being digitally excluded. So what I'm going to share with you today is our blueprint. And every year we update this blueprint. And the blueprint shows that bridging, I guess. So our aim is to fix the digital divide. So in the UK, 10 million people lack the most basic digital skills. But as Matthew alluded to earlier, it's not just about the lack of digital skills. Sometimes it's about just having no access at all. And currently around 1.5 million UK households have zero internet access. And then a further 2 million UK households struggle to afford that internet access. So it's not always about lacking digital skills or the motivation or the confidence. Sometimes it's just about that pure ability to get online. What we do know, however, is that 67% of people who are currently not accessing or using digital skills would improve their digital skills if they knew that that support was available. So it's really interesting to understand that at this moment in time, that people absolutely do want to learn and are seeking to build and develop their digital skills, but don't always know where and how to access that support. Matthew talked about the value of transacting and the ripple effect, and we absolutely know this. We know that the UK will get good value for money. So we benefit by around £15 for every pound invested in digital skills learning. So there's a huge potential for a return on investment for anybody who supports somebody one-on-one to improve and enhance their digital skills. But also as an individual, I can't remember who referenced the poverty and fuel poverty earlier, but the most digitally engaged will pay on average £228 a year on their bills than the least engaged. So there's a real definite, there's the value for the collective, but then there's also the value that's really tangible for the individual. So for us, it's really brilliant hearing every speaker this afternoon talking about the ways that they're making things more accessible and supporting people to get the kind of advice and guidance that they need. But for us, there's three foundations: one, affordable internet; two, an access to a device in order to be able to get onto that affordable internet; two, digital skills; but most importantly, community support. So, a huge majority of people want to access that support in their community with people that are like them. Stop my screen, stop my share. So what I would be saying really wholeheartedly from a point of view of how do we support people to become more digitally included and access the devices, access the support that they need, is one, make sure that they can get access to a device and connectivity, but two, within the community that they live, have people that not only understand the support that is available and on offer, but the different ways that people might need to access it and support them to be able to do that. Thank you.
Unmute myself, sorry. Okay, thanks so much, Natasha. And that was a particularly excellent sort of infographic, the map that you had up there, which I hope we can have a chance to kind of study in a bit more detail when we kind of have access to that. And I think what you're saying there about the importance of the three things: affordable internet, access to a device, but also the community support element in order to assist people to both to access, to enhance their own skills. It really does kind of resonate, I think, with a lot of us here, that it's that community level support that is so important and is often so important to so many aspects of trying to address exclusion. If we could just kind of start to draw the session to a close now, because we've got a few minutes. We've got about sort of 50 minutes or so, just a little bit less, to kind of have further discussion and to sort of do a Q&A session. I mean, it's been an excellent session, and I really, really want to thank each and every one of our speakers. We've had a lot of speakers, and it was always the intention of this session really to kind of demonstrate a range of voices and a range of different experiences as to how to kind of address the issue of accessibility, digital exclusion, and more general types of exclusion. And I think, but part of the reason for doing so and inherent in all of this is that not all of us are always going to get this right, and all of us are on a bit of a learning experience in order to learn how to do the right things, and to learn from each other is often, you know, absolutely the best way to kind of address that. And with respect to that, actually, I just kind of wanted to say, on the one hand, thanks very much, Sohaib, for sharing your toolkit. There might be other resources that are out there that people are aware of that we should all know about, or maybe haven't seen. If you get an opportunity to put links into the chat in the time that we've got left, then please do so. But I hope there'll be other ways in which we can share those kinds of resources with each other as well, because I think that would be helpful. I've been sort of scanning the chat for sort of Q&A sort of material, and there is one that I'm just going to start with, actually, to throw out, perhaps not just to the panel, but to anyone who feels they can answer. And I think there is an opportunity for people to join us by turning on their cameras and just speaking, if you can do that. But I just wanted to focus on one of the questions that Helen Stockton from NEA has asked, which is something around, what are the biggest mistakes or errors that services make when trying to be more inclusive, when they may have the best intentions, but perhaps get it wrong, could do it differently? What would be the main things that we think we should think about in order to ensure that we do get it more right than wrong? I hope that kind of summarizes the question. Is there anybody from the panel that wants to try and give an answer to that kind of question? Nikki.
I think the example that Kim gave about the BSL interpreter's role just not being understood at all in communication that Kim mentioned is a good example of how things can go wrong. Some of that is about education, I think, and I think that's why sessions like this are so important, because it allows us all to learn from each other and to learn from those bad examples, but also to learn from the good examples. I think somebody else said in the comments as well, it's about not assuming anything. Not, if you're not sure of the right thing to do, then ask the people that you're trying to reach with whatever it is you're trying to communicate, and ask what will work for them. And I think that's a pretty key thing for communication of all kinds, really. I wondered as well if Vicky or Annie might want to talk a little bit about the workshops that you ran for keeping warm, keeping health, being happy, using the cards to allow people to explore issues around fuel poverty and energy awareness.
Well, the cards in the workshops was quite useful, because it was a fun way of doing things for being warm, being happy. It had, for examples, different ideas how people can pay for the gas and electric, and about being different ways how people might pay. One of the most things, but like, we also use different people's stories. We talked to people who was worried how to keep themselves warm, really, and how difficult they found to pay for bills. Either, you know, if you were someone who not very good at seeing, they found the bill itself complicated to understand it, so they would have needed someone to help them to read it. And we also did, if I can remember correctly, but we did go out to some students, what could get us different ideas, what would make the letters a bit more easy to read, by covering part of the letter up to make it a bit more easy for them. We also had one student what came up and where it would pop up on your phone and talk to you and let you know if your house was hot or cold and you needed to turn your heating on, or you needed to put some more money in your smart meter. We got to got different type of ideas from the students what got involved with being happy. They one of the things some of his colleagues really liked is the clock. It was like a clock, wasn't it? And where the screen would come up bigger, so it was easy for them to read and understand it. It was very good, really. And the one me and my colleagues who was working with the students, but wow, on the one where what it would come up on you if you have the app on the phone, where it would talk to you or I'll let you know, but you would need to turn your heating on, your house is too warm or your flat's too warm. It's a shame, but it didn't go ahead. But like it was how the students explained it. It just looked very interesting, and it might be useful for maybe not everybody, because everyone's got different needs, but it would help some people who it was probably not very good at seeing, or it wouldn't help people who couldn't hear because it talks to you. But the thing is, the other things like the bills or the clock might have helped some people. It just depending on different people's needs were really, to be honest. But that's the reason why it was very useful to talk to different people to find out what was easy for them.
I think it highlights what Natasha and other people have been saying, that there needs to be lots of different forms of communication, absolutely tons. And we learnt, we were on a real learning curve with that, because we followed that through some of the ideas with being warm, being happy, to see if anything could be taken to market. But the amount of money that people were saying that would be needed for something like that, we just couldn't find that type of huge grant that it would have taken to do that. Because there were some absolutely cracking ideas, some really good ones, some of which are now available, I think, with the different Hive and different things that you can get on your phones. But as we've said, so many people are digitally excluded that, how many people have got access to that anyway? So lots of different ways.
One thing I'll end it with is it's just really a shame, but there's not enough things out there, especially people who can't hear. And so it was very interesting from the ladies who was doing sign language on here, because that's one of the things we also found, weren't we, Annie? But there was not enough found here to, to do sign. It'd just be lovely to be if there were more things out there to help people, especially who can't see or are deaf.
Yeah, I think, Vicky, you're absolutely right to draw attention to the fact that we need to be attentive to the fact there need to be so many different types. There are, in fact, a lot of different technology and solutions that are available, but many of them do need to work better for so many different householders as well. And I think that's the experience that you've kind of been talking to there as well from the groups that you've been involved with. I guess we are coming close to the end of the session now, and I just want to kind of summarize a bit. Unless there's any further burning questions or issues, there's a few in the chat that I'll try to just address a little bit as we conclude. If there's anything else that anybody wants to kind of make as a point or to leave us with. No. Okay, so yeah, I will draw us to a
Peter, could I just say one thing? I've just seen something in the chat that that Ian's put in with some of the when we're running small events, we sometimes do need translators. Is there a way in which you can send links for that, Ian? That would be great. If you can just send it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of one of our advisors, they just, they've been going through the BSL qualifications themselves. We've financially assisted that because we can see that it's really positive for us. But we haven't got a kind of write-up of it. It's just kind of something that's happened, really. So we have done events.
Okay, thank you.
We'd still book you know, a kind of professional really who's got that highest level, because there's different levels, and you know, Lorna's, you know, I mean, can sign very well, I'm sure, but not at the sort of competency and speed you need for something like this. And I apologise, I realised I was pretty quick in my presentation, which, sorry.
That's great, Ian. I understand absolutely. Actually, Nikki, I was just you put a note in the chat about because at NEA we've registered with something called Sign Video. Is it worth just very briefly mentioning that, Nikki, if you've got the if you can do that for us?
Yeah, I should have mentioned it in my little speaking slot, actually, apologies. So yeah, NEA signed up to a service called Sign Video. It's one of several BSL video interpreting services, and it means that deaf BSL users can call directly to speak to our advisors through a video BSL interpreter link. So that makes it much more accessible to people. So if any of you are working with deaf organisations or deaf people, please let them know that we do have Sign Video. There's more information about how to contact the service on our website, but also on the Sign Video directory of services that are registered with Sign Video as well. So that's, again, one of the things that we're doing to try to make our services and our advice more accessible to more people.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Nikki. And we will have to kind of draw the session to a conclusion now, but I think, well, it's been really informative, and having so many speakers present different perspectives, I think, has worked really well for me, and I hope for you that have joined us. One of the things that I think, in terms of just a few words of conclusion, is that one of the things that's come out of today's session, and in fact, Danielle has just put a note about this in the chat, has that COVID accelerated so many of us to have to look at how we delivered our services, and to do so in a way that we aimed to keep inclusive, but which in fact possibly not always was as inclusive as we wanted it to be for the needs of many service users, many clients. And I think the opportunity to go back into more face-to-face support is obviously presenting itself as COVID, which is clearly still a threat there, but which we hope will be moving beyond as the months churn on. But there's a risk, of course, as we move beyond COVID, that there'll be fewer opportunities for face-to-face services, because we've now got established sort of digital and online channels. And whilst we've sought to address how we can make those more inclusive, I think it does point to the fact that face-to-face support or some type of community engagement support remains a really important tool in getting practical advice and support services out to so many communities, and particularly those communities that might not otherwise access our services easily. So with that, I will kind of draw us to a conclusion, or I'll have my colleagues collaring me for crashing into the next session, which we can't do. So really just like to say a very big thanks to all the speakers, to Ian, to Matthew, to Nikki, to Sohaib, to Vicky and Annie, to Kim and to Natasha. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and I've certainly learned a lot from it, because there is still a lot that we can all learn from each other. And I hope we'll be able to gather again in some similar kind of session, because I don't think it's an issue that we can afford not to address, particularly as the winter crisis is going to accelerate these issues for us, but because we need to ensure that we embed accessibility and inclusion into the road to net zero, and that absolutely must be a core part of it. So with that, I'll draw things to a conclusion. Thank our participants. Thank you all very much for joining us on this session, and hope to see many of you more face-to-face at future events. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.